Hello and welcome. That's right, you're trapped in NerdCage Live. This ain't just a reaction show, but a debate show and a live discussion on everything that makes people like you and I tick. So thank you for joining us tonight. Please hit that like button and subscribe. I'm your co-host, Jay St. G, coming to you live from Syracuse, New York, and always with me, the warrior from Wakanda, the Fiend from Louisville, my man, Marq Withers. What's shaking?
Hey, what's going on, man? Super excited to be here as usual. And yes, you all asked for this one and we were all too happy to oblige. We're going to be talking this week about the 25th anniversary of what is considered Michael Bay's best film, The Rock, starring Nicolas Cage and Sean Connery. Now, Jay, you and I both rewatched this over the weekend. I personally feel like the movie actually is a lot better than I remembered. I actually wasn't too impressed with it the first time around, but this time I kind of felt like the action in it was pretty impressive for 1996, and the story wasn't bad either. So I wanted to kind of get your opinion. What do you think of this movie now, 25 years later?
I'm not gonna lie to you, I was a little bit like, oh, really? We have to watch The Rock? This is the one you chose? But you know what? After watching it, I'm glad you all picked it because I actually had a lot of fun watching it. And I'm going to say this, a rare combination, Michael Bay, Sean Connery, and Nicolas Cage, and probably all three of them at their best, honest to God. And the beauty about this movie, not only it's pinnacle 90s action, it's a survival story, an action movie, and a redemption story.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this much. I am not the biggest Michael Bay fan. As a matter of fact, aside from, the Bad Boys movies, I just really don't like a lot of his stuff. But I think he really shines here. He did a really great job of providing action in a way that really keeps you riveted and keeps you invested.
Now, we have to answer the $1 million question because it's the big elephant in the room. I'm surprised it's taken this long, and it's never come up on a live stream either. Nicolas Cage. This is our first Nicolas Cage movie. You would think this would be a more popular topic among our many discussions we've had on NerdCage Live. Genius actor or just downright terrible actor? Where do you see Nicolas Cage?
It's hard to say because if you look at his earlier work like Moonstruck and Raising Arizona, you really can see the genius that you're speaking about. As his career has progressed, the sort of film choices that have sort of come about have not been the greatest. And a lot of his performances have seemed sort of over the top. So I think that he definitely has his moments. I mean, if we talk about this film specifically, I would have to say genius because the role was originally written for Arnold Schwarzenegger. And because Arnold actually tapped out of the project and basically decided not to do it because the script wasn't up to par, it was Nicolas Cage that actually took a look at the character and basically fleshed it out and designed the character around him and actually turned it into something that was usable. There are very few actors, I think, that can really do that and actually come out with a successful end result. For other projects, that's, the jury's still out, I suppose. What do you think?
I'm going to say the last 10 years have not been kind to Nicolas Cage. I mean, a lot has to do with his personal decisions and his finances, which caused him to take any role and phone it in. And, he's been labeled as a bad actor. But honestly, I think he's a genius actor, especially going back to his early work. The fascinating thing about this movie is this is where we finally see Nicolas Cage, the action star. This is where I give him props. He's not afraid to get out of his comfort zone. Clearly, for a movie that was designed for a Schwarzenegger or a Stallone or a Willis. Following this, we had Con Air. There was As Bad as It Is, Face Off, and of course, Gone in 60 Seconds. So no one talks about Nicolas Cage, the action star, enough. And this is Nicolas Cage, the action star at his best.
Right. And I think this was probably his first role as an action star. There's an interesting interview that I happened upon when I was researching this movie, where he kind of talks about when he was offered this role, he questioned himself whether or not he would be right for it because he hadn't done action on that level. And because there were naysayers that were basically like, well, this isn't a role for Nicolas Cage, that's what spurred him on to do it. And because he was able to pull it off, like you said, that opened the door for Con Air, for Face Off, for a lot of movies that we know him and love him for.
And on top of that, Add the element of Sean Connery. Keep in mind, Sean Connery was 65 years old when he did this movie. Now, to me, Sean Connery is an action star. I mean, he's James Bond, but it's just impressive that at that point in his career, he was still physically able to do a movie like this and make it believable. And of course, I will say this, being a Michael Bay film, the dialogue, so hearing the vulgar side of Sean Connery was actually a real joy to watch, just saying.
Right. Now, fun fact about this movie, when we speak about Sean Connery, one of the conditions of him accepting the role, because he did not want to take the ferry to Alcatraz every day, which is where they actually filmed, he wanted a cabin to be built on Alcatraz so that he could just stay there throughout the duration of the film. There was some back and forth about it, but ultimately the studio relented and actually built him a cabin so that he could actually, so he, for the entire duration of them filming this thing, he actually lived there.
Oh, wow. That totally makes sense now that you mention it. Now, we had to get to it. Anytime there's a Michael Bay movie involved, there's very noticeable nitpicks. So, Marq, being the nitpick king that you are, I want to know if there's some nitpicks in this movie that just drove you nuts.
I try not to nitpick this at all because, like I said, I'm just really not a fan of Michael Bay at all. And if I allowed myself to go to that place, I knew that I just wouldn't enjoy it. So I don't really have any specific nitpicks for you, but I'd be very eager to hear what yours are.
I think the nitpicks in this movie are probably the same nitpicks in all of Michael Bay's movies. Now, don't get me wrong. I love action. I love seeing shit get blown up. I'm no physicist. I'm no genius. I'm not a chemist. But I will say a lot of stuff that gets blown up, things don't explode like that. When you see a car crash, cars don't blow up like that.
Right.
If there's a pile up, it doesn't blow up like that. You see a lot of that in this movie, and you also wonder where the bodies go. I do believe the explosion porn is definitely, I wouldn't say at its peak here, but you could definitely see where it started, the trope that started it all. And if you know anything about anything exploding, you know that things that explode don't explode like that.
Right.
I know the 80s have their action movies, 90s do as well. When I think pinnacle 90s action films, The Rock, Die Hard with a Vengeance are really the first two that come to mind, and that's why this movie is very enjoyable to watch from that perspective.
Yeah, and I'd have to agree with that. In terms of the all flash, no smash trope, like, I really think that this is the best of his films. This is up there with Bad Boys and Bad Boys 2 as far as being his best films. I think it definitely helps having Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage and William Forsythe and Michael Biehn and a cast of that caliber. It's definitely one of the more memorable action films of the 90s. And for that, you have to give it its respect.
Absolutely. I just want to point out my favorite scene alone. It's borderline amusing. I don't know if that was the intent or not. When Tony Todd gets blown up by the rocket. That was so over the top. I loved it. I was laughing. I'm like, am I supposed to laugh at this? But that scene stood out among the rest of the movie. It really did.
Right. One interesting thing that I noticed that I didn't know at the time is that the actor that plays Tuco in Breaking Bad and in Better Call Saul is actually in this movie. He's actually prominently featured, but because he wasn't a big star at the time, none of us remembered that. So
I was watching the credits. Jim Caviezel's in the movie too.
Really?
He was one of the pilots in the plane there.
Oh, wow.
I only knew this by reading the credits. But anyway, to wrap this up, I would just say that The Rock is peak pinnacle 90s action film. I think it's easily deserving to this day of a solid 7.5 out of 10.
I'm going to go a little bit lower, and I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. Like I said, I'm not the biggest fan of this director. I really did enjoy the story aspect of it. I love the cast. There's a lot of flaws, a lot of logic problems still in this movie, but the action does make up for it. So I would give it that score.
All right, so before we go, we ask you to please like, comment, subscribe, ring that bell, and spread that shit like so USA from Louisville to Syracuse and to all of our friends and fans around the world at NerdCage Live. Enjoy life, stay safe, and good night.
Sayonara.
Ooh, trying to get out of the nerd cage, are ya? Well, before you go, hit that subscribe button. And if you're really intrigued, ring that bell. Thank you for dropping by. Until next time, tell everyone you know about NerdCage Live!